So this was on a previous study for this week, and the focus on it was showing how victimhood is used strategically and contextually by political heads of state. And so the question asked by this was focused on how does the nature of military struggle change the role of collective victimhood in belligerence public communication. And the way that this was focused on was by looking at a comparative study between two armed conflicts in Israel, the Yom Kippur War, which occurred in 1973, and then the Operation Pillar of Defense, which was in 2012. And statements, opinions, commentary by Israeli political elites were basically looked over from the New York Times and the Jerusalem Post. They were studied and compared to look for victim narratives and to see when and was between these two conflicts was the use of victimhood or victimization used on a political sense and communicated to the public. And just to give a quick snippet of both these conflicts, I'm no war expert on, especially in regards to Israel, but from what I've read and understood, the Yom Kippur War was essentially a attack from, I believe, Egypt and one other country on Israel. It was a land dispute in the 1970s, and it was, to my understanding, it was way more of a case of Israel being somewhat of a victim to a massive attack, essentially. Whereas Operation Pillar of Defense, which is kind of tied into the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, it was a instance where Israel essentially aiming to destroy terrorist stations that injured and killed tons of Palestinian civilians as well in the process. So that's kind of the general basis of what these wars were. And when looking for victimization or victim narratives in these two conflicts, what we found was that victim narratives were more used during the OPD than during the Yom Kippur War. This is kind of phrased interesting. This is how they phrased it in the actual study. But during the Yom Kippur War, Israeli elites avoided victim claims, the use of victim claims. So in 63.4% of the comments, there were no victim claims, meaning that in 46.6, I think is the right math there, 46.6%, there was some form of either victim narrative or direct victim claim. Whereas during the OPD, they occurred with different intensity, whether it's a narrative or a direct claim, in 71.9% of the cases. And this finding generally is counterintuitive because you typically assume that victimhood is claimed when there's actual danger occurring. But in this case, this paper argues that Israel used victimhood as a political communication strategy instead of an actual cause for being a victim. And so the key takeaway that Anupriya came from this, especially related to the workplace, was examining the thought leadership incentives for work. Workplaces checking in to see how managers can motivate their employees to perform better, recognizing that manipulation can from a leadership, a top-down perspective. And she also recommended trainings that nudge employee accountability and responsibility, recognizing the importance of training employees on life skills and on things like accountability, crisis management, responsibility, which can help, which can go a long way in ensuring that they're aware of secondary gains that come from using a victimhood as a strategy. And so essentially, that's essentially what the study was about, was seeing that this is obviously, it's different locating this down to a workplace perspective when it's taken from such a high national or international conflict. But yeah, I found it interesting that they were able to analyze and figure out it was based on news headlines, you know, how victimhood as a narrative can be used to arouse sympathy or just used in the case of the war. So I'm interested to hear your thoughts.
I would say it makes a lot of sense to me because, you know, to go to war or to go into any kind of risky conflict or risky competition with a group, you've got to you've got to have a lot of motivation, and you've got to believe something about the potential success of your group. And it's like, if you're being attacked, is, you know, if the right what is the right motivation? Is the right motivation to say, hey, we're all victims, and which I would think, like, intuitively, the right motivation is we can win. You know, that kind of thing. Like, we should be confident and like bolster our confidence in the face of an attack, and vice versa. If we want to go on the attack and we want to have you know, sort of a reason to go on the attack, we need motivation. And I don't know that the right motivation would be we should go attack because we can win. It's more like we should go attack because we're being attacked. So to me, it kind of makes sense to have like a flipped motivation where it's not reflecting the real situation, but the motivation itself is useful in getting the group to make it, you know, to make a collective effort. You know, because collective action, especially in war, is very risky for individuals, and they have to have a lot of motivation to do it. So that's a really cool, very kind of interesting little finding there.
Yeah, I like that point. I think what is interesting in that I was reading about what do you call it, the OPD, the Operation Pillar of Defense. I believe that the conflict started, at least the Israel, I think it's called the Gaza Peninsula, because I think a terrorist attack on 4 Israeli citizens and some sort of car bombing of some sort. And so I imagine, like, you're right, Jeremy, that was used as the victim narrative to justify their attack, to say we need to get this under control, and kind of claim that narrative, like we're being attacked, so we should attack. Yeah, it's very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's like a fear-based. It's like which one is going to be more important to use fear or confidence, or I don't know. I mean, it's kind of like reminds me of like 9/11, like going into Iraq when they didn't do anything to us, but hey, they've got these WMDs, and, you know, so we're under threat, so we better go, you know, better go get them. And it's like, we need some sort of motivation to have the reason to go over there. There's no better motivation than, hey, we've got to defend ourselves by being proactive. I think I see that we've seen that in workplace too, right? I mean, people.
Well, I think at the time we invaded Iraq, 2/3 of the populace believed that they were behind 9/11. So we were victims, right? According
Oh,
to those
sure, yeah.
people,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Yeah.
That was a narrative for sure.
I was definitely thinking about like like authoritarians and their rise currently in politics. They kind of like have this thing. They seem to be like that is a common theme where they're simultaneously victims yet powerful. Like you know, like I have all power to do whatever I need, but, you know, they'll always I am expressing grievances because, like, that's kind of like how they get their political basis to identify or whatever. And I don't know, I kind of thought about that, and like whether like real versus perceived that, and where that victimization is placed. Like if it's placed in a outside the body politic or the group towards another person, can they still like not feel like hopeless with the, you know, even if they're in the face of all types of victimizations, if it's heaped elsewhere or something, you know? Jeremy, your kind of thoughts made me think of that way. Yeah, I don't know, just all kinds of thoughts for sure.
Yeah.
I have some questions around sort of the evolution of generational sentiment, with Israel itself being such a young country. Something that occurred at 25 years in, I think, oh, we're moving along. We have our own state. We're expanding, more hopefulness. Whereas here we are 70 years later. And I would think that be more likely to feel like a victim after being just bludgeoned for 70 years. and being at war for 70 years versus being hopeful for peace. So that's
That's
my only question.
that's an interesting take too. Is over time about, you know, sort of being the lone democracy in that area and being surrounded by enemies, and it's like over time do they increasingly build this victim narrative so that, yeah, so that 70 years later they are, you know, yeah, it's interesting too. You know, I think, was this the second week in a row that Anna Priya did a victimhood study?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really interesting topic because we could see it. I mean, we see it, you know, all over the place, especially in the workplace. When when we're dealing with workplace conflicts, it's like there are always victims on all sides and it's all the other person's fault, and it's not their fault, right? And they have to be on the attack, and they have to be on the defense, and they're gathering their information and their defenses, and because because people are against them. So it's a really important topic.
Yeah, like in that book I've been listening to, Conflict Without Casualties, it talks about the roles, and there's the persecutor or whatever, and the victim, right? The rescuer and the victim. And so it's like these people, one kind of needs the other, and
I think the topic that you brought up also, Nate, which is like, you know, talking about I don't know if you alluded to it, but I mean, basically, like if you look at like the opposite sides of these two kind of, you know, extremes of political bodies, you know, on one side being fascism and the other side being, you know, Marxism or socialism or communism even, or like extreme socialism onto communism. And you look at both sides and they both have these interesting victim stories or different victim stories, but it's like the fascism victim story is there's usually one person at the top, and his story or her story is, look at those other people over there. They're attacking us. We need to get back to the way it used to be when they weren't attacking us, or they weren't, you know, this way. And so we need to go backwards. We need to go back. So that's there.
Even if that isn't made up backwards.
Yeah. Like exactly.
Right,
we're a victim because there's these other people that are coming for us, and
sure.
they're not and it's like the fascists are the ones in power. We are the oppressors. However, we're being attacked by these groups over there, and we have to stand strong. And then it's like the other side is almost kind of feels like opposite, because the communist and Marxist idea is the victim is the oppressor, and the proletariat or the working class, we need to be equalized, and so we need to fight against the ones in power, you know. But there's always this very powerful victim story on both sides that motivate collective action. So
right.
It's an interesting ends of the extreme.
Yeah, completely. Yeah, I think throughout history you probably find that's story. You know, those are modern labels, but I imagine, you know, that's the stories we've been telling ourselves for a long time.
Yeah, and they totally play out interpersonally too, because you see it at work. It's like in the workplace. It's like I literally just witnessed this like 2 weeks ago when I'm facilitating a conversation between a boss and his support, and, you know, direct report, and the direct report is in the position of, I'm a victim against this person who has power over me, and the boss is also feeling, I'm a victim against this person who works for me, and why should I be a victim in my own company? You know, why should I be the jerk in my own company? Why should? So it's like this. It's really interesting that the power dynamics have different types of victimhood stories, but they're both victims.
Right.
You know.
That's interesting.
Yeah, that brings me to kind of what you mentioned, Nate. It's the Cartman drama triangle. I don't know if that's what the book that you're referring to. That's what they bring up, is that it's called the Cartman drama triangle. And the cycle of being the victim to the persecutor to the rescuer, and just how that just keeps everybody just stays in conflict because they assume those roles, and there's no looking outside of it. And it's easy when you're the victim to just be that victim, and that's the role, I think, of dispute resolvers and mediators and peace builders, is to kind of help look outside, and like, how else can we handle this? Like, what other roles can we take here to help us get out of this conflict?
Yeah, do you think it's important as mediators, when we're dealing with folks that feel that they've been victimized, to in some way help them envision a different way, or in some method help them feel more empowered and less like a victim? I mean, is that sort of, do you think that's like sort of key to the process of peace building?
I would say so. I just took a class last night on psychology of conflict, and we were talking about the idea of multiple realities in conflict and the importance of kind of bridging the gap there, because people can get stuck in their own reflective beliefs of being in their own reality, even if it's not completely true. And so I think that part of getting them out of that reality and into a more shared identity reality is to is to empathize and help let them feel what they feel, but then to try to guide them to a place of in a mediation, guide them to a place where they can try to see the other perspective. It's a really hard thing to do, I think, sometimes, but it's important.
Yeah,
Something
really,
I think it's relevant from the same book, just because I've been like reading it and like or I've been like listening to it, and when I kind of feel like haven't been paying enough attention, I've been backing up, so I've kind of like gone through it a few times in the last a few weeks. But anyway, is it there like, and this is kind of a concept that's been sticking with me these last few days, is the idea of openness as like power, and like I think that's something that was I don't and this like a lot of this stuff is
like
really new to me.
vulnerability,
So
like
that
vulnerability, or like honesty is what it,
both I
what you
think, right? Like it was
wow.
like the truth and like and laying yourself
Yeah,
out there, like because there's something that basically happens in a conversation when it happens, and you're like, yeah, you're laying it all out there, and it's like for someone to keep playing in that game, it like kind of it stops. And I'm sure you guys know a lot more about it than I do because I'm
yeah,
new to all this stuff. So, but I thought that just made me think of that and like the
that's a
idea of the
great,
victimhood, powerless, and bringing power. I think that's one tool that from what I'm
yeah,
my experience or whatever from reading
that's a
is
great way to look at it.
there. Yeah.